see all four of us? Shall I make us little so that my screen is not?
This is all good. This is all good. Thanks, Mila.
Get a better background.
Hi, welcome everyone. It's really nice to see everybody online. I think we're going to have a really good turnout today. Please let us know where you're from in the chat function. If you have a look at the chat function down the bottom, if you can't see your control panel, just click the Alt key on your keyboard and it'll bring up the control panel for you. Lovely to see you online. Having a look at the keys at the bottom, we also have your reactions. So if you like what somebody's saying today, please give them a hand of applause, give them a thumbs up, and let's get some reactions going. It's really lovely to see you. Thank you, Paul from Canada. Lovely to see you online, and from Dallas, all over the world. Really lovely to see London. I hope you get some sunny weather soon. Barcelona, Namibia, fabulous. DRC, South Africa, Scotland, Hong Kong, Zimbabwe, more from Johannesburg, Jersey. Lovely to see you online, Perrin. Leonie, very nice to see you. Oh, excellent. The daffodils are out. Spring is coming. India, Pretoria. Lovely to see everybody online. For those who don't know the Good Governance Academy, if you have a look at the Good Governance Academy website, we really were started by Professor Mervyn King in 2019. We host colloquia twice a year, which bring thought leadership on critical business issues. And all of our events are free to attend. They are also CPD accredited, so you can use the certificates of attendance for your professional designations, be it an Institute of Directors or perhaps a Chartered Accountant designation. It's really lovely to see everybody online. We've got just over 100 people online. But I'm going to hand over to Mark Morley. Mark is first time he's online today. He is our training manager, and he's the workforce behind the Training Academy. So Mark will just tell us a little bit about the Training Academy. Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn, and thanks to everyone. I'm really excited to have this call now and this brought to fruition. This is something we've been working on with the guys at CQG for a little while now. Very excited to see this program. It's been very well put together, and this is a course that we've recently endorsed. And endorsing courses is something that we're doing more and more recently, where partners of the GGA, support members, or even people that are newly connected with us are bringing forward programs that are business supporting business critical issues, and a number of the other philosophies and practices that the GGA stand behind. So sustainability, value creation, all the things that we were looking for just that lead to better governance within organizations. And this is one such course that was brought forward to us. So it's recently endorsed, and we're very excited to showcase it to you today.
Thanks so much, Mark. And at this stage, I'd like to invite my panelists to introduce themselves. The first person I'd like to invite is Derek. Derek, if you could maybe just pass us around your colleagues. It's really lovely to have everyone online. John, Mila, and Derek. They're the profiles. Thanks, Mila.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the Good Governance Academy for hosting today as well. And we're delighted to be able to present on behalf of the Centre for Quality in Governance. Part of the, if you like, the excitement about this is that we see governance for the organizations as board as being essential to a high-functioning organization. We're here, obviously, to highlight the e-learning program that we've developed, that you've heard briefly introduced today. A little bit about me. I'm not going to go into that in detail. I'm a doctor by background, but I've been involved in leadership in healthcare in a variety of roles for a number of years. But importantly, at the minute, I'm a chairperson of two separate hospitals with employees of about 16,000 and a budget of about 1.4 billion UK pounds. What that means to me is that we've got to put good governance into practice on a day-to-day basis if we wish to be high-performing as an organisation for patients and the population that we serve. So we see governance as an enabler, a mechanism of assurance, And as Mark has already alluded to, how do we make sure that we're business critical fit? How do we make sure we're sustainable? How do we make sure that we're looking at the strategic directions for the future? But I'm really delighted to introduce John Bullivant first, and then Mila Maranova will then begin the presentation and introduce herself at this point. But John and Mila have done a huge amount of work on this, so I'm going to hand over to
Right. Thanks,
John.
Derek.
Over to you.
Thank you. So I'm John Bullivant. I'm a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians in Edinburgh. I founded something called the Good Governance Institute in the UK, which is primarily a public sector organisation, but also something called the Benchmarking Institute, which is an all-industry organisation looking at best practice around the world. We got into this, I think, well, during COVID, when we weren't travelling around so much, and we thought it would be an opportune time to try and pull together all of the knowledge and experience we've built up over the last 15 years or so, and put that into a e-learning platform, try and make it easy to share some of the important aspects of good and better governance. We've always been supporters and proponents of Professor Mervyn King, and some of his thinking comes through in the e-learning elements that we're going to showcase for you today. Thank you. Over to Mila.
Thank you, John. It's a real pleasure to be here today. I have to say, I'm really quite impressed by the geographical reach that the GGA has. Just to introduce myself very briefly, I am a medical doctor by background, clinical research fellow at Imperial, have looked at patient flow, data and monitoring, quality improvement, and governance over a number of years. John mentioned we weren't doing as much traveling. The reason for that is that we were working together with the Royal College of Physicians of Edinburgh on behalf of the WHO, supporting government ministers and their teams and boards across the world just before COVID. But unfortunately, given the crisis, we had to pivot, and that's why we decided this was the perfect format, particularly for an audience like this, to be able to actually access some of our thinking and some of the work that we've done over many, many years. I'm also a founder by background, but that's a very, very different hat that I wear. I'll just jump straight into our presentation. We're going to essentially talk to you a little bit about who we are and why we're doing this, and talk you through the course that we've designed, as well as the maturity map and the maturity matrix, sorry, and the app. And we'll give you some examples and a bit of a flavour of what the course itself looks like. So just to start off with, what is our purpose? Well, our purpose in this showcase really is to demonstrate a roadmap to high quality governance for both new and existing members of governing bodies, boards, senior management teams, and of course this can be applicable to many others working across regulatory bodies, auditors, and so forth. There are a lot of the examples that we utilise are in healthcare. The course really does focus on principles rather than structures. Therefore, it means that the programme, it really is fit for purpose for all territories and multiple business sectors as well. We developed a definition together with the World Health Organization in terms of governance. So this is the systems, the processes, and the behaviours by which we lead, direct, and control our purpose and functions in order to achieve organisational objectives shaped by our relationships to our partners in the wider community. And for us, I think this is one of Professor Bell's messages, I think, all the way throughout his career. It really is about asking the right questions at the right time and getting the right answers to achieve the right outcomes. And this stands not just in healthcare, but across any of our work. So we started, as John mentioned, to develop this stream of work just at the beginning of COVID. And so there are three elements that we'll run you through today. We've developed a maturity matrix around which all of the e-learning is based. And in order to make that matrix interactive, we've also developed an actual app that can be used in real time. And we'll show you a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And of course, the core of the program really is the e-learning set of 10 modules, which guide you through multiple different elements of governance. John, I'll pass on to you to tell us about the matrix and its development and how we use it.
Thanks, Mila. I mean, this is a model or an instrument we've used many times in the past, and essentially it's trying to pull together a whole series of elements, which you can see down the left-hand side, and then look at levels of maturity from the sort of very basic level where we might agree with the principle articulated, through to actually some early progress where we're sharing our ideas with our staff and our partners, to actually making firm progress and then achieving results, and ultimately maturity. And the final level there, level 6, is the one where we tell everybody how good we are because we're achieving all of this. The important thing to emphasize is you can use this as an individual, your position within an organization, and reflect on your own experience, but you can also use it collectively as a governing body or a senior management team. And the important thing there is it's not a test. You're not trying to get the right answer. You're trying to share your individual experiences and then try and understand why perhaps we're not all on the same page. We've got different points of view based on different experiences and level of knowledge. So we've developed this as a sort of interactive tool. As I say, you can use it as an individual, and then you can go back and look at it another time and see whether you've made progress. You can set out where you are now and where you want to be in 6 months' time, so it gives you a roadmap. But one of the most useful ways of dealing with it, as I say, is collectively. So if we look at the next slide, Mila, what you can see here, if you get your colleagues on the governing body to express where they fit into the matrix, this board actually is obviously at a fairly early stage. They're at the basic and early progress levels. Fair level of consistency, and they've been quite honest about the challenge that they need to move up to a more mature level. Whereas if we look at the next slide, this is really quite a mature organization, and again, there's a consensus here that people are pretty much on the same page. They think they're doing very well. Interesting one, there's a couple of outliers. The ones down halfway down the page could be someone who's new onto the board and just doesn't have the knowledge, or this is the one person who's not indulging in groupthink and actually is challenging whether everybody's as good as they think they are. Another way of looking at it, if we look at one more slide, what we've done here is we've divided up the page between the executive members, the ones shown in black, and the non-executive members shown in red. And this is showing a really polarized governing body or board. So the executives look like they're very happy with where they are. They may be a bit over-optimistic, whereas the independent non-executive members on the board shown in red are actually really challenging whether we're as good as we think we are. This board needs a really, sincere discussion. Is this a lack of knowledge by the independent members, or is this them being a bit more skeptical and really challenging that we've got a lot more to do? So, the matrix can be used in lots of ways, but we found it very flexible, and you'll be able to see this on the app. So we've developed that as separately from the e-learning. You can use it as an app personally. You can put your scores on and then return to them. It's a very simple sort of mechanism for saving where you are and then going back to it. And what we've, in the later stages now developing, is a sort of more interactive board tool, which allows you to do what I've just shown you, where all the members of the board can express where their positions are, which allows the dialogue. So, as I say, it's not a test, it's not an exam, it's not a regulatory function. It's actually to help organizations to think about their internal performance and how they're representing themselves, and then try and move to a better consensus based on some sense of reality. So it's tried and tested. We've used it dozens of times as an instrument, but this applies to the whole board.
Thanks, John. And as I mentioned before, based on the matrix, we've developed the modules themselves, and each module will explore several elements of the matrix, and within the actual learning modules, you can actually score yourself and see, and again track your scores and so on. So the 10 modules that we've developed are across multiple elements of governance. So an introduction to who we are, how to utilize the learning program, of course. We delve back into the origins and principles of modern governance, and then go on to explore the different roles and behaviors, as well as leadership and strategic direction. Integrated governance, as we know, is critical, as is governance between organizations, and we look at partnerships, place-based approach, and anchor organizations as well. Scrutiny, regulation, and improvement, as well as risk and assurance, so number 7 and 8, particularly, and number 9 as well, safety, specialist governance, and audit are critical in terms of, particularly through a sort of healthcare perspective. And the final module looks at UK and international governance approaches. As Mark mentioned, many critical topics are discussed throughout the modules as sort of recurring themes, and those do include the diversity, sustainability, and sort of preparedness. But we are currently developing some in-depth modules, particularly looking at those topics, which should be available in the coming months. The program, the modules themselves are designed to be very interactive. We've worked together with a company called OCB Media, who are quite very experienced in creating e-learning programs across Health Education England, NHS in England, NHS Improvement, and so forth. And so they've helped us actually to make them extremely easy to use and interactive. Each module has, of course, learning objectives, various different case studies, both public and private organizations, different tools and techniques and exercises are utilized, and of course, sources and references. And in terms of questions and answers, I'll show you what that looks like towards the end of the presentation. Derek, sorry, John, could I hand over to you?
Yeah, one of the key themes that runs through the various e-learning elements is this idea about how boards gain assurance. And what we've developed is an approach. It's not unique. Some of you have come across it before, but we tweaked it a bit. And it's very much based on a first line of defence, which is usually our frontline workers, who have a responsibility for the services and the work that they do, picking up problems, whistleblowing if necessary. But basically, if things go wrong, they've got it in mind to try and fix them as part of their local teams. And there's a second line of defence, which is all of those departments like information or human resources, where it's opportunity or maintenance, where there's an opportunity to work across different departments and pull together common themes which have emerged, which shows there's a generic risk within the organisation rather than in a specific location. Bit that's maybe a bit different is we identified the third line of defence as the board or governing body itself, and this is really about it being capable of scrutinising the information that comes to it and challenging whether what they're being told is so, whether the outcomes will be achieved, and doing that in a robust way, not being fobbed off, and supporting each other at the board level. So the board itself is a really important part of assurance, based on the earlier bits of information coming through. So there's a sense here of frontline to the board level, from ward to board, if you like, in a medical setting, and then supported by external oversight experts who might be brought in to help. But one of the important elements of all this is not to rely on the regulators, who often confuse their role as providing assurance, and recognising, we need to know ourselves how well we're doing and challenge whether we're going to achieve the strategic outcomes that we've set ourselves. And there's quite a bit within one of the modules which talks about setting outcomes, triple types of outcomes in terms of impact on society, environment, as well as the bottom line, and being candid about the problems which we face in the future and how we're going to deal with those. So it's an important underlining principle within the governance modules, but it's explained by reference to both public and private organisations. Thank you, Mila.
Thanks very much. So one of the questions in my role as a chair when we talk about governance is often people will talk about management structures, and I'll come on to that in the next slide, or a series of individual elements. So for example, in this slide, complaints from clients or complaints from patients or professional reviews such as appraisal, etc. At a board level, what we have to be able to do is consider how do we collate that information in a way that allows us to recognise if there's early warning signals in the system. And I won't go through the slide in the middle, but that will be around volume of activity, risk, frequency, unwanted variation. But we have to be able to pull this together in a way that we don't see the individual streams of information as being independent rather than dependent on each other. And therefore, that's a challenge for a board, is how do we get the committee structures to work in that way to support an aggregated information as opposed to a series of individual information streams. Next slide, Mila, thanks. And the other challenge for us in terms of when we look at it, I've already alluded to the fact that often when you ask about governance, somebody will point to a diagram such as this and say, oh, this is our governance structure. Well, this is our committee structure. Governance is how we are making decisions, how we're seeking assurance, and how we understand the business works. And while the committees are all fundamental to that, and as John's just alluded to, it effectively the third line of defence in terms of understanding the challenges, but also the third line of defence and understanding what we're doing well. And so at the board level, we do really need to understand how decisions are made using the individual data sources and how decisions are made and assurances sought through the various committee structures. And that can often be quite challenging both for individuals to think, what is the purpose of the committee structure? What is the purpose, of the third of line of defence? And something like the maturity matrix, which John's already allowed, is actually fundamental to looking at how a board is operating in terms of its maturity of decision making. So the purpose of this is really just to say, how do we reduce this fragmentation? How do we support active decision making, real-time decision making for the best outputs for the organisation that the board is running or serving? So thanks very much for that, Mila. Back to you.
Thanks, Derek. I'm just going to stop sharing my presentation just for a minute, because I'm going to show the audience a bit of a live demo of the platform, just diving into just a short exercise from one of the modules. So this is kind of the look of the program, and I'm hoping that you can see this. There's no voice being utilized, so it should just be me. So essentially, in this module, we're as part of one of the learning objectives, we're looking at the different types of board member styles. So everybody has their own style, which I know we will have seen across our organizations, but this really does influence how the board actually operates and how it informs the strategic direction and organizational culture as well. And culture is something that we talk about a lot throughout the program, as we know that is one of the most difficult elements to change. So this is why it's really important that particularly the chairperson and others do understand that everybody has different styles, and it's important to recognize those styles actually to be able to understand where different opinions come into play. And there are many different methods to look at the styles. We know about sort of Belbin, Myers-Briggs, and so forth, but the one that we're utilizing here is created by Dame Julie Unwin, who is a motivational speaker. So I'm just going to go on to the next slide. So what we're going to see here is the 12 different styles that Julianne Wen discovered. So we'll just run through them very quickly so you can see sort of how you would run through this whilst you're actually doing one of the modules. So we have the risk taker, we have the compliance queen, the challenger, the data champion, the fixer, the history holder, the inspiring leader, the passionate advocate, the peacemaker, the strategist, the user champion, and the wise counselor. So, I mean, we can see a sort of much easier to view list here as well if we click on the on that button. And now when we move on to our next part, what we're going to do here is just a short exercise that the person who's running through the module would select 2 of the different styles that you are, and 1 that you are not. So the idea here is to kind of really look at yourself reflectively in terms of how you are when you sit on the board. You can see that if you click on this button, again, we can view the different ones to remind ourselves, and you can also download the entire card set, which just opens into a separate tab. So once we submit it, essentially, it really is just telling us what to do with this and how to how to critically think about it. Are there styles that we're missing? Are there styles that are overemphasized within your board? What gaps do you need to actually fill to actually bring in that skill set, especially? And I'm going to stop here with my demo and go back to the presentation. I briefly mentioned that there is also a question and answer element to the program. And essentially every single module comes together with a separate sort of crib sheet, shall we say, of sort of some questions that you can answer for yourself once you've completed the module. And then what we provide also as part of that is on the right, you'll see a filled in crib sheet, which essentially provides some answers that might be poor, but also some answers that would be a better answer. So just quite a helpful tool at the end of the modules, and of course can be used by candidates and the boards as well. So Derek, I think I'm gonna pass on to you, but that was our sort of very short demo. But we think this is a fantastic program. We highly recommend it. And Derek, I think I'll leave the final words to you.
Thanks very much. Again, for those of you who are on the call today, you can clearly read what we've outlined there. I just want to highlight elements of that. From a program perspective, what we're offering is an interactive platform, both for the individual and for an organization. It should support reflective practice in the reflective learning, and also how we move forward with constructive challenge. So as John alluded to earlier, you avoid groupthink within a board or board's function. So what we will do through that is we'll create a common purpose. We should create an organizational culture, which is vital, as Mila's mentioned. We should be able to meet our regulatory and legal obligations. That means we should understand our performance. And we should have an assurance framework, and we've not talked about this in detail today, which means that we understand our risk and what our risk appetite is in terms of how we deliver at an organizational level. So hopefully you've found that to be a very brief introduction, but hopefully it has whetted your appetite for joining us on this journey that we believe we're on. And we think we're picking up a lot of interest now from organizations who are beginning to sort of think more purposefully how governance can be a real enabler for high quality organizations. So thank you very much. Then I think it's question and answers now.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you so much, Derek and Mila and John. You are all medical professionals in some way and form. Did that have an influence on coming together around quality and governance specifically? Who would like to jump into that?
Well, I'm actually not a medical professional. My PhD was sort of research in education, but what we found is working in the British health system is probably the most complex set of organisations you could find anywhere in the world, and spans, you know, all sorts of things in terms of manufacture to service delivery, financial management, you know, and Derek and Mila, who are clinicians, will explain that a bit more. But I think the other thing we've realised as well, particularly in the British Health Service at the moment, there's a move much more to a collaborative rather than a competitive model, and that's meant organisations have to reach out to their partners who share in providing common services, but also to suppliers who need to understand the organisation. And one of the target audience for the work we've done here are those organisations, whether they provide a service like audit or actual goods and services, who are incredibly confused by the way that complex organisations like the NHS in the UK operate. But we've resisted, as Derek had said, and Miller had said, to go down the kind of structures and processes and focus on principles. And I think we've managed to do that together collectively quite well.
I could come in briefly. I think, I mean, as John's alluded to, health is a complex system, but I think we've come together through a variety of routes by being joined by a common purpose. And I think we all actually, in addition to working in and around health, have worked in other areas. John's alluded to that, but certainly we also work in third sector and academic environments as well. So less perhaps commercial, but certainly we've worked across the domains, and Miller is working in a commercial environment as well. I don't know, Miller, whether you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, Derek, I think absolutely everything we've discussed today really has you see this across many business sectors, including even the commercial sector. I mean, I work in the commercial sector, but on the healthcare technology side. And you know, the principles really are the same. What we've gone through today really does resonate even in the commercial sector.
Thanks, Mila. Lots of questions about, so how much does the tool cost? Can someone maybe give us an indication there?
Mila, can you do that?
I can do, yeah. Well, we're working together with the Good Governance Academy to provide the e-learning to their interested parties and participants. So the tool itself is costed in British pounds at the moment, and normally when you're buying one single module, it's £30 per module, and for that you get access up to 2 years for the module, and we do also have a sort of special discount when you buy the entire 10 set e-learning, and the price for that is £150. So essentially you're getting, you know, five of them for free. And we will also be via the GGAs sending you a sort of special further discount, especially for your members as well.
Awesome.
Thank you. The other thing is that, you know, we have done, and we intend to encourage organisations to buy for their whole boards, and we've got a tariff for that, which we can provide depending on the size of the governing body. And one of the very useful things we found, because of course you get a bit of churn on a board, that if you've bought the set for your whole board and then new members arrive, they can take on the set of modules that from someone who's moved away. It's not particularly aimed at new people onto boards, but what we have found is it's a very useful introduction for people when they join an organisation, and they don't want to go on asking the questions all the time. You know, how does it work? What does this mean? So using it as as part of your induction process actually is a fundamental opportunity you can use the system for. And perhaps in a minute I'll tell you about another example about apprentices onto boards that have made use of it.
Yeah, John, why don't you go ahead and do that? Because one of the questions that we've had is asking about case studies that illustrate how this has added value to organisations.
Well, there's an organisation in the UK actually started, or Great Britain started in Northern Ireland, which is called Boardroom Apprentice. And it was an attempt by one of the chairs, Eileen Mullen from Northern Ireland, to get greater diversity onto the boards, both in terms of life experience and age. You know, we often have more elderly people on boards and they've got time to participate. And Eileen had set up a scheme where they encourage organisations to accept they would have an apprentice, and then interviewed and accepted people on to become an apprentice for a year, attending a board, unpaid and not a decision maker, but they would contribute to the discussions. That's part of the deal. And we provided those apprentices with a suite of the modules as part of their sort of learning process. And that programme, which started in Northern Ireland, has now been extended to England and has proved very successful.
And I'll just add to that. I mean, John, that's just one single example. I think one of the other organisations that we've worked together with over the last couple of years is the organisation called BAPIO, the British Association for Physicians of Indian Origin. And they do a huge amount of work in terms of bringing over workforce to the UK and so forth. And they've been utilising that as part of their sort of induction and introduction to working within the NHS in the UK. And I mean, saying that, you know, many different health systems do look at us as an exemplar in terms of you know how the NHS functions. One final thing I think, John, we didn't mention is that the app itself, somebody was asking about costs. The app itself is free for you to use, so you can go ahead and download that on the App Store as well. Yeah, I think I've answered pretty much everything. I think the only other question I saw that might be relevant towards me before I let Derek come in is that somebody was asking about the actual program. Is it conversation led, or you know, that kind of thing? I think, I'm sorry for slightly confusing. The e-learning program itself does have audio and does have, you know, different graphics, different videos coming in and so forth. And I just did show you in my example one that did that just today. So it guides you through sort of continuing through the exercises and continuing on throughout the module. Derek, go ahead.
And sorry, just to interrupt, Miller, just a quick one for you again. Is the Apple available on Android as well as Apple?
Oh, John, I think that's for you.
Oh, sorry, you access the app. Someone's asked where you get it from. If you go onto our website, Centre for Quality and Governance, the app's located there and it's available to download, and it will work on, my understanding, I mean, I use an Apple, but it will work on smart tablets and on mobile phones of different manufacture.
Thanks, John. Does it have a specific name? Have you named the baby?
It's the Maturity Matrix app. It's as John said, I think it's accessed via the main site. I mean, we will be sending all the information of the special discount, all the you know, access to the app and everything else following the seminar.
Lovely. Thanks. Sorry, Derek, to interrupt. Over to you.
No, not at all. I mean, Mila's just answered part of Alison's question in terms of the format. We'll make all of that available. A couple of comments for me. I think there are a number of examples. I've certainly used the Maturity Matrix as part of our board development process, and I'm doing that with our new board in about 3 or 4 weeks' time. The crucial thing, and John's alluded to this, is it's not seen as a tool for judgment. It's seen as a tool for discussion and debate to develop common understanding. But in terms of his other question about complexity, one of the things that we encourage is that actually, although many organisations and we humans are indeed complex, quite often what we try and do is oversimplify that. So there is an element of embracing complexity, and the modules are designed to support us think in that sort of complex matrix way, rather than a unilateral, unilateral dimension to that. So the reality is we are very aware of complexity, and the matrix that Jordan put up, in fact, helps us embrace complexity because it covers several domains across several degrees of maturity. So yeah, complexity is fundamentally important. Does it help? I would argue yes.
And I take it it's not just for health, right?
Exactly. That's what I was going to say,
Okay.
Derek. One of the questions is it just health or is it other industries as well? And I think that you've essentially just answered that, although a lot of the examples that we utilize, given our backgrounds, are within healthcare. It can be utilized in other industries. As you've seen, the matrix itself is not just health specific, and the entire program is based around the matrix.
Yeah.
Mira's got a good question. Sorry, Derek, carry on.
No, I mean, I sit on a university board as well, and in terms of the sort of metrics of a university or a organization, that the matrix would apply equally well, as Miller said, to that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, Moira's got a good question. Is there an introductory demo of the course which provides an idea and overview?
Good question. Over to you, Miller. The answer is yes, but I'll let somebody else answer it.
The answer is absolutely yes. One of the modules is exactly that. It just provides, I'm afraid you'll see all of our avatars. You may get rather confused by mine because I have very short hair in it. But yeah, there is a module that we'll share with you thereafter. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks. Alan wants to know if he can be a reseller. I think that's what you're asking, Alan. Do you offer affiliate sales?
Back to you, Miller.
I think that's something we'd probably work together with the GGA to explore. So definitely get in touch with us. We'd be happy to look at working together in different ways.
Fabulous. Thanks. I've got a technical question, and I was mentioning this behind the scenes backstage. So I was really deeply involved in the ISO development of the ISO standards for governance of organizations, and more recently, the publication of the governance maturity model. How does maturity and quality, how do you feel they relate to one another?
John, that's your question.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think one of the curious things about the British Health Service is it's very regulatory based rather than based on ISO type self-assessment. But I'm a member of the strategic planning group of the Chartered Quality Institute, which again has a great involvement with the ISO standards and governance and healthcare and all the rest of it. And I think what we've recognised in this, and this echoes some of Professor Mervyn King's thinking, is that the key point here about good governance, and the same with quality, is it's either dynamic or it's static. And what we found is a lot of the organisations we've worked with are what you call static quality, in that they're based on regulation and compliance with a standard and no more. Whereas the sort of better governance, the more dynamic model, is always focused on continuous improvement, is never complacent, even when the organisation is successful and perhaps reflected at the moment in being mature, but never stops wanting to improve. So I think we see a very close affinity between good governance and high-performing quality organisations. It has been a bit of a struggle with some of the NHS organisations, because you tend to get scored or marked on how well you comply with a standard or a regulation. And we've tried to help organisations break out of that and say, it's no good being mediocre and okay. You have a duty to the people that you serve, and that's, a mediocre service is a failure. So that striving, which is reflected in Derek and Mina's careers, is always about, what else can we do? What can we do better? How can we join things up? How can we align better with our partners. You know, it's no good just discharging someone from hospital into a social care system which isn't functioning. There's a responsibility for that to be joined up, and everybody's responsibility. So I think we almost find governance and quality now are interchangeable. But the really important part is the dynamic part, which is constantly looking for improvement.
Mm. And I think you mentioned integrated governance. Was that a term that you used?
Yeah, for my sins, I wrote the handbook on integrated governance in the UK in 2008, and it reflected a period at the time when we saw a lot of siloed thinking. So people would look at quality, or they look at information governance, or they look at the finance. One of the Secretary of States at the time, after some documented failures, said, you know, never again will we look at quality and finance separately. They're either side of the same coin. And it alludes back to Derek's point about complexity. You can't do one. You can't do quality without looking at finance. You can't do finance without looking at quality and staffing and all the other issues. So, you know, what runs through the thread of this particular thread running through this work is about the joined upness, the integration of all aspects of governance as a common thread.
And you touched on, I can't remember if it was you or Miller or Derek touched on sustainability, because there's also a concept of joined upness and integrated thinking coming through there.
Yeah, and again, if I may, I think as you'll know as well, Carolyn, with the ISO program, in many ways, the preoccupation with product has been focused in ISO, but there's been a move now to about creating sustainable organizations. And in many ways, I think that's a better standard, because it's about the survival of the organization. And there's a strong element in a strong part of one of the modules which talks about what we all know about in terms of SMART objectives, but looking forward and making them measurable. It's a common feature we find in the boardroom that the board papers often look at last month and not at a trajectory going forwards. So the element we've written in around risk appetite is very much key to that concept of, are we going to achieve what we've set out, rather than just looking back at what may or may have happened last month.
Can I just come in? Just briefly, in terms of sustainability, I think part of this is not just the sustainability of the organization, the sustainability of the organization within its collaborative structure or its partnership structure. So that broader element, and that's certainly something that we need to look at, both in terms of, you know, I'm linking sustainability to green, which is unintentional, but sustainability to how we work in a carbon neutral way with, you know, our supply chain, etc., or how we work with schools, colleges, and others around the workforce for the future. So just sustainability for us is now looking at that broader partnership structure and how we work together, rather than each organisation working independently as well. So that's part of our sustainability agenda.
Thanks, Derek. A question came up earlier on around, you know, and you answered it, Mila, in terms of the, and Derek, you as well, in terms of a university structure. But I've had some other queries come through on emails through to me that I was asked to pose in this forum as well. But the question really is around, if you're facing a board and you're not part of the board, you're a company secretary or you're an executive, and the board has never dealt with the concept of quality and governance before, and linking the two together. How do you go about posing and I know you've spoken about business case, but how do you go about posing the problem and trying to convince them that this is actually a right way of going? Because obviously the executive is the recipient of poor governance as well.
Yeah,
Who would like to take that?
I think one of the words which has sort of come into good governance in the last few years is really about clarity of purpose of the organisation. And I think the board, probably led by the chair and the independent members, requiring the whole board to think clearly about, you know, what are we trying to do? What's the purpose of this organisation? And it's not just to get through the day or just to meet sort of you know, in healthcare, a waiting time requirement. It's much more assertive and aggressive in terms of wanting better outcomes for people and a quality of life for staff and anybody who comes into the organisation. And I think that's really driven the need for a collective view around purpose, which isn't the narrow set of financial and operational objectives that we used to have, and much more about society and environmental outcomes, you know, to be a good neighbour as an organisation, to not be a polluter, to have respect for staff in the organisation. So articulating those kind of critical elements actually has helped the boards to think collectively rather than, you know, I've got to meet my finance standard or my operational standard, whereas somebody else is actually thinking, well, what's the point? What is it we're here for?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of what you've seen and we tried to discuss today is about the board as a whole having a collective view, and where it's polarized for some reason to actually bottom that out and, you know, and get some clarity.
Talking about standards, sorry, Derek, carry on.
Fundamentally, it's a very important question, though, isn't it? Because it's actually a question as if you've about culture, about leadership, how receptive is a board to thinking differently? And I suppose the question is, how do you begin that journey for a board that perhaps has been looking differently? And I think if you can get a board to start thinking, well, perhaps we can look at some elements of this, not try and solve everything in one go. Perhaps the maturity matrix does provide an opportunity for a board to look at differences of opinion and have some blue sky thinking. But I think it's fundamentally a crucially important question. That this isn't something you switch on overnight, as you know, and it's a question of how do you make that journey work? What we're hoping is the tools and techniques and the program that we're offering really helps that. Plus, if you know, working with yourselves or other organisations, it's often needing to work as part of a broader team, isn't it? To try and help individuals who are working in perhaps challenged circumstances, because we've all been there. If everybody, you know, we've all worked in board environments which are not necessarily high functioning. So a very good question, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah. Another one, you're talking about standards from Perrin around. Does the application afford the ability to consider how you perform against differing governance frameworks from around the world?
John, do you want to pick that? We've tried to sort of we've tried to be agnostic, if you like, although we've used health as because we're most familiar with it. We've tried to be quite agnostic to a country, and that's why, as John said, we've looked at principles. Obviously, we'd be very keen to get feedback from individuals as to how well that lands, but the reality is we're not looking at an individual country or an individual even organizational type, although most of our examples are drawn from health because they're the ones we can give deepest examples in. But John, do you want to come in?
Yeah, and I think we've reflected on the kind of very formal UK board structure of an executive and non-executive combined board, where legally in the UK both kinds of board members have the same legal responsibility. So, and in fact, although they're, of course, finance or a medical director is supervised by the chief exec, around the board table, they have a responsibility to the chair, who will call them out as well. They're not line managed by the chair, but they're board members, the same as the independents. But we have reflected on different types of board. We've looked at European and other countries that have a two-tier system. We've looked at non-profit organisations, and we've looked at independent, privately run companies which often don't have a board at all. And some Eastern European countries, or what were Eastern European countries, have that kind of model where the chief exec is accountable to a government minister or to the owner of the company. And what we found is they operate or need to operate in a very similar way to the combined board model, with clarity of what they're trying to achieve and accountabilities and scrutiny, both internally and by external auditors and people who will help you with things like ISO or regulatory functions. So we found more in common looking at the different models than we found different. Structures are different, principles are the same.
I really love, thanks very much for that, John. I really love, I'm familiar with fellow governance geeks, and I always like to ask the question, why are you putting so much effort into this? Because these kinds of things don't give you the return, financial return, that the amount of effort that you've put into it. There's just years of effort and experience. And what is the passion, maybe starting with you, John, and then Mila, what is the passion that's driving you to do this, John? Because you've done this, I mean, starting the Good Governance Institute, which the CEO is a board member, actually, of the GGA. So what's driving you to be passionate about this?
Well, and I think Andrew Corbett-Nolan, who you're reflecting on there as CEO of GGI, I mean, he always talks about fairness. And I think there's an underlying sort of factor here that, you know, you're looking for fairness, you're looking for organizations to deliver with a level of fairness to everybody who wants to engage or has to engage with them. And we don't always do that. And I think the thing that always drives me is, in spite of, you know, encouraging good governance for a number of years, you wonder why we have so many governance failures, you know, and why we haven't seemed to have learned the lessons from each other. But I think we're beginning to make some inroads with that, and you know, it's been pleasing. I've always found it pleasing that when we've shared ideas like integrated governance and risk appetite, that they get picked up by people. One of the ones we introduced very early was an etiquette for board members.
Nice.
So that, you know, you would be explicit in how we will deal with each other in the boardroom, and it allows people to call out someone who is not reflected on the etiquette that we've agreed. They're not rules as such, but it's behaviours that we don't find acceptable, and it allows individuals to call out somebody who's performing inappropriately. So it always amuses me when, you know, I go into someone's office and I see pinned on the wall one of the things we wrote years ago.
Lovely. And I could have used that last year. Thanks.
Well, I'll send you the etiquette.
Thank you. Mila, what's driving you?
I think my approach to governance in this scenario is actually sort of a bottom-up approach. I think as a young junior doctor, I saw many things that I felt that could be done better, that processes could be changed, that patients could be, you know, receiving better care for whatever reason that was. And I think that's what led me to working with Derek and sort of quality improvement. We've worked across so many different, you know, hospitals, run national collaboratives. We've seen the good, the bad. We've seen how, you know, change can happen, albeit incrementally. And I think that's, you know, at the helm of that is governance, and especially quality governance. And that's why I've kind of continued a lot of this work, and it's the way to actually improve, you know, outcomes for patients ultimately.
Lovely. Derek, you're on mute, but if I can ask you to add your passion point.
I'll be very brief. I mean, from my perspective, it's how do we support continuous improvement at an organization, or, you know, through from top of the organization to the delivery units of the organization. That's always been part of the ambition, and I think that what we've talked about helps us with that. I think in terms of the comment about financial, you're right. It's your financial gain, if you're going to make it, comes further down the line, doesn't it? It doesn't come with immediate effect. It's not an immediate financial gain. You lose a little bit of sleep and a little bit of weight while you're getting through the journey. But yeah, so those are my two drivers. One would be continuous improvement and the opportunity to perhaps link quality and finances somewhere down the line in a way that's beneficial.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to put Mark on the spot if I can. And Mark, I did try to message you about this, but can I please, while we are, if everyone can maybe thank the panelists and show their appreciation, if you could just explain to us, how do people go about getting courses endorsed?
Sure, yeah. So the first call is to go to the website and look at the training section. There's some information there, but if you just drop me an email, we need details about the course that you want to have endorsed, and obviously it has to be focused on governance. There's some parameters that we look at, and a lot of this has been discussed on the call today. The core thing is it's addressing a business critical issue, but it's also supporting the other things that we've discussed here today, like sustainability and ethics and value creation. So if you submit your material to us, or the content, and it doesn't have to be finished yet, it could even be an idea that you've got and some content you've put together. You submit that to us, we can take a look at it, just make sure that it aligns with our own philosophies and the training that we would choose to endorse. We would then send a pre-assessment form back to you, so you can go through that, and it just gives you some things that we look for when we're endorsing courses to make sure that it meets certain criteria. We have a panel that review that assessment form, so the criteria is pretty stringent. But once you send that back to us, we'll then look through that, compare against the content you've sent us, and then we can come back to you with some recommendations, or to let you know that it's something that we would be prepared to endorse. And then following that, there's an engagement contract that we send out to you, and then a process following that. The first step is to send us the content, and we'll just make sure that it aligns with our own philosophy and the other courses that we would typically endorse.
Thank you very much, Mark. And thanks everyone for being online. And thank you to the people that we're watching on YouTube. And we are looking forward to starting this course. And as I said, as we all said, I'll be sending out an email with some specials and some ideas that are further along the line from the Centre of Quality and Governance. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.